Real estate investment practice problem using Excel. Amortization schedule focusing in on rate changes and the impact to the amortization schedule from them. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Here we are in our Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet and would like to follow along, note that there are 3 tabs down below: the example tab, the practice tab, and the blank tab. We're going to first focus in on the example tab, in essence being the answer key. The information's on the left-hand side. We're going to be starting with the information and already having created our amortization table, making it into a table, adding the slicer. If you want more information on how to do that, you can take a look at prior presentations. This time, we're going to be focusing in on what the impact will be if we change the rate. What will the impact be? Most people's first thought will be, well, what will the impact be on the payments that will be impacted, keeping everything else equal and simply changing the rate. So we'll do a calculation there. We'll add a nice little drop down just to make a fancy Excel worksheet. And then we'll also think about what will be the impact to the changes in the amortization schedule. We'll also make a pivot table so we can further analyze some of those changes in a couple other worksheets, focusing in on the interest and the loan balance and what the impact of the rate changes would be if we hold everything else equal on them. Okay, so let's go on back. The practice tab, by the way, second tab, will have some of the information pre-formatted. So the blue areas here will be pre-formatted, making the data input a little bit easier in this tab. The blank tab, back to the blank tab, is not blank. It has our starting point in it, but the stuff that we will be creating, we're going to be creating from scratch instead of having pre-formatted cells already in place for us. All right, so here's going to be our information. We've got the home balance to $500, down payment 20%, the down payment amount then $100,000, loan $400,000, years 30, months then 30 times 12 or 360. The rate, here's our focus now. Remember, when we think about something like the payment and the creation of the amortization schedule, all these other things are a factor that we can then zoom in on individually, which we will do in future presentations, including the loan amount, in essence, when we're looking at the loan here, which is derived from the home value and the down payment. And then the periods here are 2 other things that can have an impact. So we'll take a look at them in the future. We're now focusing in on the rate. So the first question, of course, is, well, if I change the rate and I keep everything else equal, loan $400,000, months 360 or 30 years, what will be the impact on the payments? So let's do that down here. We'll make a little table down here. We'll also use this little table to create a drop down for our percentage, a fancy little drop down for Excel. So we're going to say the rate. Let's put this down here, rate, and then I'm going to say the payment. And payment, I'm going to abbreviate with PMT, which is going to be the abbreviation used for the function of a payment in Excel. Let's do our fancy formatting of the header, going up top to the Home tab. Let's go to the font group. Let's make this black and white, which is what we typically do for the header. Let's center it, alignment and center. And then I'm just going to make an array of rates, and these, of course, could change depending on what you're looking at. So your range of rates may be somewhat specific, right? You might have a specific, within some range of rates, depending on what time frame you're looking into this. I'm going to start at 1%, and then we'll increase it by 0.25%. So we'll start off with 1, and then 1.25, and so on. I'm going to format these into percents, selecting these 2 cells, going to the Home tab, number group, percentifying them. So now they made it into 100%. Let's try it again. 1.25%. I'm going to add then some decimals here, selecting these 2. Number group, adding a couple decimals. So there's the 1 and the 1.25. Then that's a series here. So I'm going to copy that series down until we get to like 7 to 8% or something like that. I'm going to drag the fill handle. Say, okay, we'll just say, what if this goes up by 0.25 to like, let's say 7.7.75. We'll stop it there. So there we have it. So there's our rates. You might want to center that maybe to make it look a little nicer as our data input. And then we'll calculate the payments based on those rates, keeping everything else equal. So loan balance the same, periods the same, just changing the rates. We'll put the amount here in terms of the payment formula. Then we will copy it down. So the payment calculation looks like this. I like to start it off with a negative instead of equal. In other words, if we just hit equals and then we have no other negatives in the formula, it would have a negative result. I want a positive result, so I'm going to start with a negative. You could also put a negative within the function, but I like to just start with a negative. Also note that I can do this without hitting equals. I can just hit negative instead of equals, and then PMT. There's our payment function. Double clicking the payment function. We're not going to be doing this with a dialog box as we saw in a prior presentation, but just by typing it in with the help of this little formatting down below, which is the way that most people will be entering data, and it's something you really want to get used to doing. So we have the rate, which is going to be, we're going to pick it up on the left-hand side instead of up top here so that we can copy that down and see how the payments will change with the related rate changes. Now, this is something that we do not need an absolute reference because when I copy it down, I want these rates to go down as well. But that is going to be reflected as the yearly rate, and we want the monthly rate. So we got to remember to divide that by 12. That's one of the most tricky things to remember. Comma. That comma takes us to the next argument. That's just going to be Excel's formatting, how Excel works. Number of periods is not going to be 30 years, but it's going to be 360. We can take 30 times 12 or just pick up the 360, which we've already calculated up top. Now we're taking that from the data set. That is not the thing we're focusing in on changing. And therefore, I want to make that an absolute reference because when I copy it down, I don't want it to move down. Therefore, I'm going to select F4 on the keyboard, $sign before the B and 6. You only need a mixed reference, but an absolute reference works well there. Then to get to the next argument, we need another comma. So comma brings us over to the next argument, which is going to be the present value, which is the starting point of the loan, which in this case is 400,000. We're keeping that constant as well as we're seeing the rate change. Therefore, that's going to come from our data up top. Also something we do not want to move down as we copy down. Therefore, we'll make it absolute by selecting F4 on the keyboard, $sign before the B and the 4. That should be it. I'm going to close it up by just hitting enter. And then I should be able to copy this down using our good old autofill, selecting it, putting our cursor on the fill handle, and dragging it down. So we're going to drag it down, and there we go. So there we have our payments. I'll make this nice and blue. I'll make it a blue just to match our formatting here. We'll go back up top and say, let's make that brackets, font, brackets, bucket. If you don't have that blue, you can go here. This is the blue. We're going to make it standard settings, blue. There we have that. So that's going to be the first thing we can do. And notice it's a lot easier to do that instead of changing it up top here, because then you can see the difference in the payments side by side and have that running balance, which is nice. Now, there's other impacts, of course, that we might want to see. We might want to see what the different impacts will be on the entire amortization table so we can see the yearly impacts that are going to be involved as well. For that, we can change this cell up top, which will change the amortization table. Let's make this cell a little bit more fancy, though. I'm going to delete the 5% here, and let's see if I can bring it from a drop down that picks up these percentages just to make it a little bit more fancy. So we're going to put our cursor in 7. We're going to go to the Data tab up top. We're going to go to the Data Tools, and then we'll hit this item here, which is the data validation, not the drop down, but just the icon. And then we have our dialog box. And we're going to say in the Settings tab, we're just simply going to pick a list, and then we'll just add our list into the range here, kind of like the sum function, choosing our range, which is simply going to be this range of percentages. There's that range of percentages that should now show up in the drop-down. I'm going to hit this item again, and that should be it. So I'm going to say OK. And so now we've got this neat little drop-down here. And you can make your stuff a little bit more fancy here by having the drop down. So there's our 5% once again. Obviously, we can then change this 5% to say 2%. It'll change our whole table on the right so we can see what the differences will be for the interest payments and the loan reduction and the loan balance and so on and so forth over time. However, the amortization table is over 360 periods. And we might want to see it on a year-by-year basis, which of course we can do with our slicer because we added the slicer to our table, which you can take a look at how to do in prior presentations by simply adding the slicer here and then by year. So we can cut it down by year like so. And that could give us a nice comparison. Note that the slicer gives us a bit of a problem because once I slice it, I can't easily change the percentage over here because it's going to basically be hiding the rows and our data set will be hidden sometimes. So for that, we might want to add the pivot table again. So let's add up the pivot table and we can see what the changes will be. And that's how we can look at a little bit more detail about the changes in the rate for a pivot table. So let's add the pivot table. And so we're going to go then in our data set, we're going to go to insert. I'm going to do this more quickly because we've seen it in a prior presentation. We're going to go to the tables, pivot table. I'm going to put it in the existing cell worksheet again. So existing worksheet, scroll up top. I'm going to put it right in the column K. So we'll put it in column K here and then just add that. And there's our pivot. Now I got to move over to the right so we can see it. There's our pivot table. I'm going to construct it pretty quickly here to break this out by year. So I'm just going to select the year up top. Going to drag that from the values over to the rows. There's 1 through 30. We're then going to take the payments. We're going to take the interest. We're going to take the loan reduction and the loan balance just as we saw in the past. Then we'll format some of these items. We'll do that by selecting the drop down here. We'll take the drop down and we'll say values. And sum is good. We're going to number it. I'm going to make it currency, bracketed, no $sign, no decimals. Okay, okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the interest. We're going to take the value field and the sum is correct. No, number format. We want the currency, brackets, no $sign, decimals removed. Okay, okay. And one more time on this one. And then the other one's a little bit different. We'll change this. Sum is correct. Numbers. We've got the currency, brackets, $sign, gone, no decimals. Okay, okay. And then the last one's a little bit different. This one's a little bit different because it's not the sum. We want the min number because the bottom line number for the loan balance. So there it is. But then I didn't change. I need to change the formatting to number formatting, currency, bracketed, no $sign, decimals gone, and okay, okay. So there we have it. Now we could then center these, do our little formatting, home tab up top. Let's do our center. Let's wrap the text. And so that looks good. Let's make this black and white, maybe black and white. And then I'm going to select these columns and make them a little smaller. And so there's our pivot table. We might then bold it. Let's make it emboldened and possibly center this row. And then maybe we want brackets around this thing. Maybe we want brackets or the borders, home tab, font group, and borderify it. Put the borders around it so we could see it a little better. So there we have that. So now that we have that information, we can then see the change on a year by year basis. If I was to change the drop down from 2% to say 3%, this changes automatically. We can then refresh the pivot table by right-clicking on it and refresh the table. Where's the refresh? There it is. There you go. So now we've got our adjustment there. And so that's basically what we can do. And then we can take the pivot table information and we can populate, other tables that might be useful, including saying we want to see, for example, the interest. If I want to see the interest broken out by percent, meaning if I want to see the years and then the percents at like 7%, 5%, and 2%, and what will be the impact of that on the loan, for example. Let's do something like that. And so now we're pulling in multiple kind of fields, so we can't really pivot it. What we could do is basically use the pivot table. We would need a database basically to pick up something like this. So what we'll do is we'll just construct it from the pivot table and do some manual information. So if I had, for example, a $400,000 loan, 400,000 loan, and the interest payments is what we're going to focus in on. That's going to be the header. And then I'm going to pick up the years Let's say 7% we'll focus on, 5%, and then 2%. 2%. Now I'm going to do some formatting here. I'm going to select those percents. We're going to go to the Home tab, Number Group, Percentify them. Let's center them. And then this is going to be the name of my table. So what I'd like to do is center it across these cells, which you can do by going to the Home tab. There's two ways you can do it. Alignment, you could center across. I don't like doing that because now I've kind of merged these cells together, which is what it's called, merge and center. So I'm going to undo that. The other way you could do it is you can right click on it and then you can go to Format Cells, Alignment, and then I want the horizontal formatting and we want to center across the selection. Center across the selection. And that does the same thing without merging all the cells, way better in my opinion. And so then we're going to go and highlight these. Let's do our black and white thing. Go into the Home tab, Font Group, black and white. So there is that. Possibly making this one a little bit larger. Going to, let's make it up 16. So there we go. We'll pick up the years, which is going to be 1, 2. Selecting those two items and autofill on down to 30. So there we have that. So that looks good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, what will the interest be on a year-by-year basis given a 7% interest rate, 5%, and 2%? So once again, we can see it year by year, side by side. And let's do one more so we can construct these at the same time. So I'll build the table up. So I'm going to center this one here to Home tab, Alignment, and Center. Let's do that. This one doesn't need to be centered though. Okay, hold on. Now we're going to then make this cell a little bit smaller. And let's do another one. The other one's going to be, let's say if there was a $400,000 loan, 400,000 loan, 30-year loan balance. And then we're going to say years, 7%. And these could be the same. I'll copy this. We'll copy this. That'll be easier. We'll say File, Copy, or right-click, Copy, and then right-click and paste. So there we have that. And now we're going to focus in on what will be the ending loan balance. Now, again, I'm going to copy the cells over here, Format Paint it. So Home tab, Format Painter. And there we have it. So now we're going to change, same percent change, 7, 5, and 2. But now we'll focus in on what will the loan balance be at the end of each period, 1 through 30. So 1, 2, and then selecting those two items down to 30 periods, down to 30. Which is right there. Okay, so let's populate these tables, and this will give us another kind of comparison that we can look at. These ones will be static tables. They're not going to change when I change the data, but this is another kind of look that we can populate the data and do a lot more in-depth kind of thought than we might do, like if we were only to look at this change in the payment, for example. So I can go over here and say, well, let's start off, hit the drop down. Let's start off at, what did I say, 7%? 7%. Let's start off with 7. If I hit the drop down, we say 7%. Changes this automatically. We're going to go to the pivot table then. This one needs to be refreshed. So I'm going to right click and refresh it. There, it's nice and fresh now. And then I'm going to copy the data I want. For this one, I'm focusing in on the interest. So I'm going to pick up the interest. I have to like hard code it in there. I can't use a formula because the pivot table is going to change. So I'm going to just copy these items, right click on it and copy. And then I'm going to paste it here, but paste it 1, 2, 3 values only. I'm not pasting formulas, pasting just 1, 2, 3 the values. And then over here, I'm focused on the ending loan balance, which is going to be here and year 1. This is where we will be at the end. So we can copy this on down, right click and copy, and bring that on over to the loan balance. Right click and paste 1, 2, 3. And so let's say we changed it to 5%. We're going to say, okay, what would happen if I changed this to 5%, drop down 5%. I'm going to go to the 5% down here. There it is. You can see the payment here is calculated at 2147. That should match our 5% that we hit here, 2147. The amortization table changes automatically. We got to refresh the pivot table, right-clicking on it, refreshing it, and then we'll pick up our same data. Now we should have new data here in the interest. So here's the difference on the interest. If I was to copy that and paste it over here. So now we've got a side-by-side difference in what the impact on the interest will be, which again could have impacts on taxes and whatnot that we would want to take into consideration. And then we're going to take this one, the loan balance, picking up the loan balance, copy that one, roger that, copy out, and then right-click and paste it 1, 2, 3. So here's the difference in the ending loan balances that would be year by year if we were talking 7% versus the 5%, right? And then let's bring it on down to 2% was the last one, right? 2% I think was the last one we were doing. Drop down 2%. And that changes here. This payment matches the payment we got here. That looks right. Amortization table changes by itself. We got to refresh the pivot table, right-clicking on it, refreshing it. And then we're going to go over here and say, let's do the 2%. 2% interest. Copying the interest column. Scrolling on down, right-click and copy. And then we'll put that in the 2%. Right-click and paste it 1, 2, 3. And there's the change on the interest that we'd be paying if we could bring that on down to 2%, which would be nice. And then we'll copy the loan balances to do the side-by-side. Right-click and copy. Pasting that on over here with the right-click, pasting 1, 2, 3. Values only. Let's center this column. Centering this column, alignment and center. Let's do our blue formatting, selecting this whole thing, making it nice and blue. Do the blue thing on it. Font group, bucket, blue, borders, font, borders, all borders. Let's do the same thing over here. We're going to take this whole thing, and we're going to go font group, borders, and blue. The interest, we'd want a total column maybe. It's total. We totally need a total. Totally. Summing up this thing. Sum it up. And then drag this across. Autofill that across. There we go. Borders, blue. We don't need a sum over here because these are the ending balances. And you can see if you're doing more in-depth analysis on these types of changes, you could see how this could give you a lot more detail that you could see at one time. Otherwise, if you're using like an online calculator, what you end up doing is changing this from 2% to 3% and then saying, well, what's going to be the impact on year 1, year 2 on the interest and so on, which you can't really populate into a year by year very easily. And then you can't see the changes on a side-by-side type of calculation. Whereas, again, if you do this in Excel and you were to vary or change one of these components, you can zoom into what those changes impact will be by using a pivot table or populating whatever you think is important to you in your particular situation. So that, and you can make a fancy table as well with this, with a drop down. You have your pivot table. We'll do the same kind of thing, same type of analysis in a future presentation, looking at the changes in the years and the changes in the loan balance, which are the other two big factors, which of course will have an immediate impact on the payment, which is the first calculation most people would think of. And then what's going to be the further deeper analysis into what's going to be the change on the interest per year and the loan balance per year, to get into a thought process of what would you do if you sold it, so long and so on and so forth. Remember, as you do this, that this analysis over here, these kind of tables are kind of getting into what you would need a database to do if it was to do automatically. So that's why we have to kind of hard code the data over here from basically the changes that the pivot table can basically take care of, so that we could do a comparison of the percentage rates and a particular component, such as the interest on a year-by-year basis.